All right, welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolute roller coaster that is the economic trajectory of India. We're going to take all this historical data and transform it into a structured journey that reveals exactly why a nation with so much undeniable potential struggled with poverty for so long. We're getting right into the policies, the history, and the hard numbers that define one of the most fascinating economic stories in human history. Let's get started.
So $80 trillion, that is a staggering amount of money, right? Well, that number represents what India's economy could have been worth in 2020 if it had just industrialized alongside North America and Europe. To put that into perspective, that is almost the size of the entire global economy today, generated by just one single nation. You see, back in the 18th century, India was arguably the richest region in the entire world. I mean, they had it all: incredibly fertile land, a massive population, and a geographically perfect position as a trade hub connecting Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and East Asia. But instead of riding that wave of the Industrial Revolution, they faced 250 years of devastating economic decline.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the wealthy past, the independence dilemma, the Soviet-style experiment, the closed economy, forced market reforms, and finally, the road to superpower.
Part 1. The wealthy past.
Picture this. You have a nation with immense wealth, some of the most fertile land on the planet, and a completely self-sufficient ecosystem. But that decline we talked about, it really kicked off around 1757. The British East India Company, which, let's be real, was basically just a trading corporation with its own private army, got involved in a local civil war in Bengal. When they won, a light bulb went off. They realized they could just install puppet rulers. They gave Indian leaders a pretty stark choice: become a puppet and keep a few elite privileges, or be conquered entirely. Because of this dynamic, domestic innovation in India practically ground to a halt. Whenever there was a problem, the leadership just threw cheap human labor at it instead of investing in machinery the way Europe or Japan was doing at the time. This stagnation lasted until the people finally united in a massive non-cooperation movement, making the occupation totally unprofitable for the British and ultimately winning independence in 1947.
Part 2. The independence dilemma. Now, a newly independent India in 1947 was not some unified economic powerhouse ready to take on the world. It was a massive political mess. To really grasp the immediate crisis they were facing, think about this. Roughly 150 million Indians were surviving on government rations of just 1,200 calories a day. Why was it that bad? Well, during World War II, the British actually banned India from building any new factories unless they directly supported the war effort. You take that ban, add a population boom of 42 million new people, and top it off with horrific crop failures from bad weather, and you have a nation that is literally starving while completely lacking the modern machinery to fix it.
So, put yourself in the shoes of the newly formed central government. You are faced with 360 million starving citizens, and your country is deeply fractured by 122 different languages and dozens of semi-independent princely states. How on earth do you rapidly industrialize this nation and give everyone a financial reason to actually stay unified?
They basically looked around the globe and saw 3 successful models they could copy. First, the European model, which basically meant colonizing others. Obviously, India fundamentally opposed this, having literally just survived it. Second, the US model, which relied heavily on military might to force open foreign markets. India definitely didn't have that kind of military power. So that left option 3, the Soviet model of rapid, government-controlled industrialization. India's leaders looked at the USSR's massive boosts in steel and electricity, and they saw Latin America's growth during the Great Depression. And they decided this was absolutely their best bet to build up the country and share the wealth with their poorest citizens.
Part 3. The Soviet-style experiment.
Now, theory is one thing, but reality? That's a whole different story. Fully adopting the Soviet model wasn't really possible without severely angering the powerful domestic elites who ruled the princely states and owned the existing businesses. So, India tried to compromise by setting up a command economy. This is essentially where the government takes control over most aspects of the market. They plan the supply lines, they pick the factory locations, and they dictate the production output. But here's the catch. A small group of government officials simply aren't intelligent or omniscient enough to centrally plan thousands of complex businesses for a country the massive size of India. It's an impossible task.
So, by trying to appease everyone, India essentially rejected the best parts of both systems and accidentally adopted the worst of both worlds. The state took exclusive control over absolutely vital industries like coal, telecom, and steel. For instance, the Soviet-designed Bokaro steel mill was a disaster. The designs didn't fit Indian manufacturing at all, and it constantly broke down. And on the flip side, the private sector was completely crippled by what became known as the license raj. If you wanted to start a business, it could take years just to get a government license. By the time you finally got approved, your state-protected competitors had already cornered the market. There was zero healthy competition.
Part 4. The closed economy.
Because India poorly mixed these two distinct economic systems, growth was agonizingly slow. And their big, flawed solution to fix it? Force total self-sufficiency. To pull this off, they tragically ignore the most foundational economic principle out there: comparative advantage. Let's look at Japan as a quick counterexample. Japan is covered in mountains, so they can't grow enough food, but they have vast coastlines. So they smartly focus their energy on building and exporting cars and electronics cheaply by sea, and they use those massive profits to buy imported food. India did the exact opposite. They slapped heavy taxes on imported parts, making it essentially illegal to import anything that could theoretically be made inside India. The result? Indian manufacturing became incredibly expensive and wildly inefficient.
And this set off a devastating and vicious cycle that still holds major lessons for developing nations today. Instead of leaning heavily into its massive agricultural advantage, they had tropical climates and abundant rivers, the government allowed wealthy elites to maintain wholesaler monopolies. This forced everyday farmers to sell their crops for absolute pennies. Without any profits, farmers couldn't invest in better equipment. Even worse, India failed to fund tropical seed research, which ironically forced them to buy seeds from places like Mexico and the Philippines. As efficiency plummeted, they lost their foreign customers, tax revenues dried up, and they became completely reliant on foreign aid just to survive.
The real-world impact of all this was swift, and it was brutal. In just 5 short years, from 1955 to 1960, India's share of global exported peanut oil plummeted from nearly 46% down to almost 1%. The global markets simply moved on because India just couldn't compete on price or quality anymore.
Part 5. Forced market reforms.
It became painfully clear that this fear of competition was holding the whole country back. But entrenched power rarely gives up willingly, right? India would only change when major external pressures forced its hand. Moving into the 1980s, the Soviet Union, which was one of India's main financial benefactors, began to weaken and eventually collapsed. The money stopped flowing. Seeing this, the US also threatened to pull its aid unless India opened up its markets. Facing literal starvation without that aid to buy food during bad monsoons, India finally started selling off state businesses and allowing foreign joint ventures. Then, in the late 90s, the World Trade Organization actually sued India and forced them to slash their massive, completely absurd 400% import tariffs. Suddenly, foreign parts were cheap, which made Indian products cheaper, which actually made Indian businesses profitable.
But when India finally pivoted to those Western markets, they hit a massive wall. China had already secured a huge industrial head start. Industry was making up 45% of China's economy, compared to just 27% in India. India quickly realized they couldn't immediately compete with China's established factory dominance. So what did they do? They made a highly strategic pivot. They astutely leveraged their incredibly large English-speaking population to export IT, administration, and customer services to the US, Canada, and other wealthy Western nations instead. A real game changer.
Part 6. The road to superpower.
Bringing it up to today, India runs on a system that successfully relies on steady domestic consumption and a booming service export sector, rather than aggressive manufacturing globalization. The modern outlook is highly promising, but it's definitely complex. India is enjoying a really reliable 6% annual economic growth rate, keeping its national debt remarkably low, and, amazingly, has only suffered 3 recessions in its entire history because it's so insulated from global shocks. But we can't ignore the hurdles. India urgently needs to fix a broken education system where right now only 55% of 10-year-olds can read a simple story. They also have to clean up unhealthy banks that are failing to provide investments, improve poor healthcare infrastructure, and cut through the heavy bureaucratic red tape that is still pushing potential foreign investors toward competitors like Vietnam or Bangladesh. Overcoming this red tape matters to all of us because India is perfectly positioned to be the next primary hub for global tech and manufacturing.
Yet, despite these immense hurdles, the trajectory is undeniably upward. If the current government can just avoid repeating the disastrous micromanagement and command economy mistakes of its past, global economic experts are projecting an incredible milestone. By the year 2050, India is expected to overtake the USA entirely, becoming the second largest economy on the planet, sitting right behind China.
So, here is the big provocative question I'm going to leave you with today as we wrap up this explainer.
Knowing their deep history of squandered opportunities, heavy-handed regulations, and economic reforms that were really only implemented when forced by the outside world, does India now possess the internal political willpower to finally overcome its entrenched elites, fix its systemic social hurdles, and fully seize its destiny as a global superpower? Something to think about. Thank you so much for learning with us today, and we'll see you in the next explainer.